The Lord be with you.
And with your spirit.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke.
Glory to you.
The shepherds went in haste to Bethlehem and found Mary and Joseph and the infant lying in the manger. When they saw this, they made known the message that had been told them about this child. All who heard it were amazed by what had been told them by the shepherds. And Mary kept all these things, reflecting on them in her heart. Then the shepherds returned, glorifying and praising God for all they had heard and seen, just as it had been told to them. When 8 days were completed for his circumcision, he was named Jesus, the name given him by the angel before he was conceived in the womb. The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
It is fitting that we begin our new year with this solemnity in celebrating the Blessed Virgin Mary, the Mother of Jesus. She is a model for us, what it means to be a disciple. She was the first one to see Jesus, the first one to hear the news. This scene in the Gospel of the shepherds coming to Bethlehem after they had seen the angels the night Jesus was born brings Mary information. She wouldn't have known what was going out on the hillside. She wouldn't have known what the angel was saying. But these shepherds come as witnesses. They come, we were sent. We're witnesses to the birth of this child. The angel said that this would be the child that would save us. And so they're sharing that information with Mary and Joseph. And so it says in the Gospel that Mary kept these things in her heart because she didn't know what all this meant. This had never happened before. We, of course, read the Gospels and we know the end of the story, so to speak, but she didn't. This was new to her. And so it was maybe baffling and not knowing what was expected of her. But the shepherds come and report that we've seen angels. They've told us that this is a special child. And so it's confirming what Gabriel told her at the time of the Annunciation. And so that's helpful for Mary and Joseph in their relationship with Jesus and how they're going to raise this child. And who is this child? And what does God expect of us? Mary has been center of our faith since almost the very beginning. She's been venerated throughout the centuries. It was controversial about who Jesus was. First few hundred years of the church's history, people had various ideas as who was Jesus? Was Jesus divine? Was Jesus really a human being? Was he both at the same time? And so that was controversial. Theologians had great debates about this. In fact, a council was called in 431 to settle this issue because it was a difficult one and a challenging issue about who is Jesus. And the interesting part of that is the answer they found was in Mary. If you want to know who Jesus is, look at Mary, because Mary is his mother. And so Mary then, theologically and in the life of the church, is the grounding of Jesus' humanity. He was born of her, just like all of us are born of our mothers. And so he was a human being like us in all things but sin. And Mary's the grounding for that. If you take Mary out of the picture, then Jesus sort of floats around. No one knows really who he is and what he is. But if you bring Mary into the picture, then it grounds him in his humanity. And that's why she's so important to our faith. When the Council of Ephesus occurred in 431, the church basically were Greek-speaking, Latin-speaking, probably Aramaic-speaking, and through those centuries, they worshipped in their own language. People in the Latin church worshipped in Latin. They all spoke Latin. People over in the Greek part of the church, the Eastern part, they worshipped in Greek because that was the language they spoke. Through the centuries, though, people began to not speak Latin anymore. They picked up other languages. We have languages that we have today that developed during those days, Germanic languages, Romance languages, and people started speaking them. And so then the church retained the Latin part of the Mass because it was so important to their identity. And so there became a sort of a separation between the people and the liturgy, because the liturgy was in a language almost nobody spoke, except maybe the clergy and some academics. But the people were sort of out on the outs of it because of the language. And that went on for centuries. It was only until the early 60s when the Second Vatican Council changed the liturgy in the Western Church into the vernacular, changed it into our language, and made it more accessible so that people weren't set apart. During this time, though, that people were sort of distanced from the liturgy because of the difference in languages, there arose a great devotion to Mary, the Mother of God. Theotokos, as she was described, the God-bearer, the Mother of God. And so people related to her because almost all of the Marian devotions were in their own language. They weren't in Latin, they were in whatever languages they spoke, so it was more accessible to the people. And so there's a great devotion to Mary that is evolved through the centuries because it really met a need for people to feel close to God, and they did that through Mary, through their devotion to her during a time when the Latin liturgy was separate because of the language difficulties. And so we have a whole history of devotion to Mary through the rosary, through various prayers, through novenas, and feasts that we have in the church that celebrate Mary because she was the door to the Lord. She was the one that people could access Jesus through her because her devotions were in their own language and they felt at home with them. But then again, with Vatican II, they changed all of this into the language of the people. And so in this country, we speak in English or Spanish, and France, they pray in French, or Italy, they pray in Italian. They pray in their own languages. And so, therefore, the liturgy became accessible. So then the question is, well, what do we do to all these devotions to Mary that we used to have that grew up at a time when we were separated from the liturgy because of the language differences? And the emphasis now is going back to that Council of Ephesus. What was that about? It again grounded Jesus in Mary. She's theologically essential to his identity. We can feel close to Mary, we can pray to Mary or not, we can feel a relationship with her or not, but the important part is knowing that in our faith that she's the grounding for who Jesus is. That's why she's so important. We have many saints that people relate to, that they feel close to. But Mary's different because she's the very foundation of the theology having to do with who Jesus is. And so we celebrate her today in a very special way, celebrate her motherhood, the grounding that she is for Jesus, and know that she serves as our mother. She was the first disciple. She's a model of what it means to be a disciple, what it means to trust in God even when you don't understand what's happening to us. That was true of Mary. Like I said before, she didn't know the end of this story. Things evolved for her that would not have made much sense at the time, but she stayed faithful to God no matter what. So at times maybe we're confused or we feel lost or don't understand why things happen to us. It's important that we think of Mary and remember her and follow her example as a model of what it means to stay faithful to God even when times get confusing or we don't know what the end of the story is yet. We don't know that later. But she gives us an example of what it means to be faithful to God as she lives out her life in the church and lives out her life in heaven as the mother of Jesus, as the grounding of Jesus' humanity for all of us.